day 5 of the 13th International Disability Law Summer School. Can't believe we're almost at the end, but luckily we have a fascinating moot court discussion to witness before we wrap up for this year. So I'm going to be chairing this morning. I think everyone knows me by now. My name is Eleanor, and I'm one of the co-directors of Summer School and the director of the centre here in Galway. So I'm just going to give a summary of how we're going to proceed this morning. So we will start with the complainant. So we're starting with the DPO that has brought this case before our illustrious CRPD committee. And the complainant has 15 minutes to set out their argument. So that's the Disabled People's Organisation Future Rights Now. Then, after their 15 minutes has elapsed, we will hear from the state, the Republic of Future, who also have 15 minutes to set out their arguments. After that, we will turn to our amicus brief that we have from the organisation called HEAT, Helping Enable Atmospheric Transitions, a climate activist group. And last but certainly not least, we will also hear an amicus from the National Human Rights Institution, that's the Human Rights Commission of Future, which has B status under the Paris Principles. So those amicus teams will have 10 minutes each, and then we return to our DPO, our complainant, for a 1-minute summary. The state will have a 1-minute summary, the HEAT team will have a 1-minute summary, and the National Human Rights Institution will have a 1-minute summary. I will be timekeeping this morning, so I will show, for those of you in the room, a physical sign or ring a bell to let you know when your time is almost up. I will then, if you haven't wrapped up in time, I will start dinging the bell more and more and more and more until you stop. But don't worry, the judges will ask questions during your 15 minutes, but I will pause the stopwatch during that time, so that will not count against you. Any time to answer the judges' questions is not taken out of your 15 minutes or your 10-minute time, and the judges won't ask questions during your 1-minute summary, so that gives you breathing space to know that you have that 1 minute to wrap up completely uninterrupted. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand over to our complainant to kick off the proceedings. So over to you, Future Rights Now, to present your arguments before the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Thank you. We first want to outline that in order for a state to fulfill their obligation under the CRPD, they have to place the rights and needs of persons with disabilities at the most centrally to any plans and policies in event of crisis situations. It is evident that there are numerous UN CRPD and other international human rights law violations here, but conscious of time, we will briefly summarize those we think most relevant and how they are violated. We will talk about the pre-situation, during the situation, and after the situation, and we list all these violations of rights. First, under Article 4 of the CRPD, the state is obliged to adopt inclusive planning and budgeting. However, there is a failure of the state to use the available data and statistics on disability to appropriately include persons with disability. There is insufficient effort to revise the existing emergency plan as per CRPD committee concluding observation to bring it into full compliance with the convention, in particular with regard to the involvement of organization of persons with disability in the development and management of these strategies, as well as the provision of accessible information for all persons with disabilities in accordance with Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. So the government violated Article 11 of the CRPD, Article 9 on accessibility, and also Article 4, especially with regard to Article 4.3 on participation of persons with disabilities. They do not consider the alternative mode of communication, as I mentioned, and also the lack of protective measures and support for persons with disability who are disproportionately affected by the disaster, including indigenous persons with disability in rural areas. As we have seen, the evacuation equipments, yeah, and the evacuation equipments are also starting from the statement that announced to the public. It doesn't consider the accessibility of information. Also, I would like to highlight the high level of institutionalization even before the crisis, the lack of disaggregated data on the number of persons with disabilities is still living in institutional setting, no effort to implement independent living arrangements to end institutionalization, although the country ratified the convention since 2013 and submitted its initial report in 2014 and doesn't respond to the concluding observation. And another issue is that there is no consideration of the impact of the crisis on the women and girls with disabilities and the intersectional discrimination on the remotely located indigenous population during and before the disasters. The early warning system was not in their languages. Another issue. Yes. Also, with regard to Article 21 on accessibility to information, there is no sign language interpretation, and also there is no any medical measures in place during the evacuation of the persons with disability, violating Article 25 in conjunction with Article 11 on the inclusion in situation of risk and emergency. Now I will give the opportunity to my colleague to continue.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the post-crisis. The state has failed to implement different articles of UNCRPD. The article is number 5, where the state have failed to establish it because the article stated that segregation within the medical settings, violations, equality principles, denial of provision of reasonable accommodations. The state has failed to adopt these articles during a post-crisis. And Article 10, where the state failed to provide a right to life for evacuated. And Article 11 that stated that no access towards facilities, disabled people not prioritized in responses. Article number 19, the state also failed on this article where the article stated that the disabled people forced to be housed in medical settings separated from families, not respecting independent living for persons with disabilities in the post-crisis. In Article 19, the state has violated the freedom of the movement regarding evacuations to far away. Also, state has failed on Article 29, where they have deprived the freedom of expressions, opinions, and access to information to persons with disabilities evacuated. And also state have failed to implement Article 26, where they have not provided educational and also ongoing education to evacuated. And also on Article 28, the state has failed to link access to services for WASH, for adequate standard of living and the establishment of social protection systems where respect for disabled people's rights. And also the Articles 31, the state failed to implement it on formal consultation mechanism to ensure participation of disabled peoples in the preparedness, response, and post-disasters. And also we have consulted other international rights and conventions where on the concluding observations on that for children with disabilities, where the state also failed to adapt it and align it with the post-crisis. Also, on the SEDA, committee published on concluding observations adopted on its 18 sessions, where the rights for women with disabilities have not been also considered. Also, we have also seen that sustainable development goals in different articles where the state also failed to implement concerning on the goals number 1, goal number 2, where they said goal number 1, no poverty and elimination of all forms of poverty, because in the post-crisis we have seen that children and persons with disabilities will face poverty and hunger. And also, we have seen also declarations on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights for Indigenous Peoples that was been adopted by the General Assemblies in 2007, and also a declaration of elimination of violence against women adopted by UN General Assemblies in 1993. All those have been violated by the state. Thank you.
So I would like to add to the violation of the right to life, because many people in the institution died due to lack of medical attention and basic provisions during the evacuation process.
Thank you, agents. That's very helpful. I do have a question in relation to the violation of the right to life. Clearly, this was an emergency situation, and in the context of an emergency situations, states are able actually to derogate from some of their some human rights. They're doing the best they can. Can you speak to that issue, that clearly this was an emergency situation, it was an extraordinary situation, it was a natural disaster, and in such contexts, is it not the case that states can derogate from at least some of their human rights in order to do the best they can?
But the state here, they do not consider persons with disabilities in provision of accessible evacuation measures. Although there are some, for example, accessible transportations, where they allocated it for patients in hospitals, and they do not prioritize persons with disabilities in institutional setting. So this is direct discrimination against persons with disabilities. And due to this discrimination and exclusion, persons with disability died in their institutions.
So it's your position that people with disabilities should have been prioritized over people in hospitals?
They can given the same or equal treatment.
Also, we have linked all these articles on international human rights law, where the state should have to consider persons with disabilities as their rights, not as a charity, because during the emergent situations, persons with disabilities should have to be prioritized.
Thank you. Does that conclude the complainant's arguments? Yes. Okay.
Yes, for the concluding arguments here, we ask the states and all.
Oh, okay. I think. Okay, so could we please hear from the respondent? Is that right? The state respondent?
Okay, all right. Honorable Committee, my name's Florence Ndakire, and I'm lead counsel with my co-counsel. Honorable Committee, we are devastated by the natural disaster that occurred in our country. We have taken all practical steps within our means to end the crisis within the limited resources we have to guarantee protection to persons with disabilities during disasters. We have developed a national emergency plan to provide for response measures in the event of disasters. According to Section 3 of the emergency plan, recognizing Republic of Future's UNCRPD's obligations, principles of disability equality should be embedded in all policies in emergencies and conflict situations. The Republic of Future has a significant population of persons with disabilities who are 35% and thus recognize the need for their protection. The Republic of Future went ahead to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2011 to guarantee protection to persons with disabilities, including the rights under Article 10 on the right to life and Article 11 on situations of emergencies of the CRPD. The Republic of Future also adheres to the Sendai Framework of Action that guides our action during emergencies. We developed a national emergency plan to operationalize our CRPD and the framework. Regarding the issue of the failure to evacuate persons with disabilities in the region, the Republic of Future was affected by 20 years period of civil wars and conflict. The Republic of Future is in the process of recovering from the effects of the war and has very limited resources. Section 58 of the National Emergency Plan provides that evacuation strategies should be devised in advance of the event and must be cognizant of the resources available at national and local levels. In the event of resource shortages, decisions should be made to maximize the benefit of resources. Future has taken reasonable steps to protect persons with disabilities within situations of emergencies by issuing several warnings of severe weather that was predicted to occur on the 21st of November 2018. Future therefore retains a margin of appreciation to utilize the limited resources in the best way possible to protect her citizens. Therefore, the limited resources could only evacuate people living in the urban areas. And it's also not true that...
Excuse me,
Yeah?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, this internal conflict that you cited happened 20 years ago.
Yes.
Surely you could have taken action to better plan for evacuation of individuals with disabilities in rural areas, especially knowing that the population is 35%. That's more than double the the average 15% set out by the World Health Organization. Can you help us to understand why in the 20 years since the armed conflict ended, you were not able to take more sufficient measures?
Honorable Commissioner, yeah, we are aware that the 20 years conflict happened, but we are taking deliberate strategies to ensure that we do everything possible to guarantee protection of persons with disabilities. One sign was the ratification of the CRPD in 2011, and the other was the development of the emergency plan. The process of reconstruction cannot be in the same possible way with a country of low resources as to the one with high limited resources. For example, like here in Europe, we try to do the reconstruction and the involvement of persons with disabilities slowly by slowly, given our limited resources. And like we said, we retain a margin of appreciation to use our resources in the best way possible to serve all citizens. So we are not sitting, we are doing everything possible to ensure that persons with disabilities access emergency response measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Agent, for that response. I have one follow-up question, though. It's my understanding that Article 32 of the CRPD talks about international cooperation, and part of that obligation in respect of international cooperation is for countries requiring additional resources to engage with the international community, to seek monies from donor agencies, for example, to help them fully implement their obligations under the CRPD. There's nothing in the records to suggest that the Republic of Future has indeed tapped into international cooperation funding. Can you explain that?
Honorable Commissioner, the way that the natural disaster happened did not provide a proper framework for us to contact the international cooperation. It happened, the warnings were issued on the 21st of November, and the same disaster happened. We did not have the time frame. This is not a man-made disaster. It is a natural disaster. Sometimes there are challenges that are bound when such disasters exist that don't even wait for us to adhere to human rights. Honorable Commissioner, we are working on it. Thank you.
Agent, I have a question for you. Your country was at war for 20 years. We understand that wars are mass disabling events, just like natural disasters. Throughout that 20-year period, what steps did the Republic of Future take in ensuring that disabled people in line with the CRPD were at the table helping develop this plan, or was this plan just developed sort of like thoughts and prayers after the event transpires?
Persons with disabilities are part of all the departments that we work with, since they constitute a significant number. Our own Minister for Social Affairs is a person with disability. We have members of parliament who are persons with disability, and the members of the utility are persons with disabilities. We believe that they were represented, but put yourself in the Republic of Future. Put yourself in our shoes. If a disaster came now, how would you consult disabled people's organizations? Thank you very much, Honorable Commissioner. Should I proceed, please? Regarding the issue of lack of consultations and participation and involvement of persons with disabilities in the design of emergency response measures, Section 15 of the National Emergency Plan provides that the Department of Health and Department of Communities have designated lead coordinators of emergency responses. Each emergency coordinator should identify a person with disability. It will be a designated liaison between community health organizations and minority representative groups in the relevant departments. We know that persons with disabilities have been part of this platform. And this is in accordance with Article 4 of the CRPD, and the minister and regionally consults with organizations of persons with disabilities. There was not sufficient time to bring organizations of persons with disabilities in the response measures due to the nature of the warnings. We recognize the significant role that the DPOs play in informing policies, laws, and plans because of their lived experience. We, as a state, value their contributions. This was not possible this time. We recognize the importance of General Comment number 7. We are not in violation, and any suggestion of such dismisses the important roles individuals with disabilities play in the response measures. Under Article 9 on accessibility, the state of future is aware that accessibility is a precondition towards the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities. General Comment number 2 details obligations that states have to take to implement Article 9 on accessibility. Before the war, the Republic of Future was accessible regarding roads and transport, but with the impact of the Civil War, this was destroyed. We are in the process of reconstruction to ensure that the Republic of Future is accessible to all persons with disabilities. Regarding the issue of physical access, the state is in the process of designing accessibility standards, which will provide guidance towards the implementation of accessible environments and transport for different categories of persons with disabilities. In the present facts, the Republic of Future contracted and dispatched ambulances and private accessible vehicles to hospitals to support the evacuation of patients. Public buses were repurposed to evacuate civilians. So we believe that persons with disabilities are part of the civilians and they could have been evacuated in those buses. Regarding the issue of lack of sign language interpretation, our communication portfolio was destroyed by the war, and we are in the process of designing inclusive communication programs that accommodate all the needs of persons with disabilities. Sourcing interpreters of any kind was an impossible task given the emergency, as everyone was fleeing, including sign language interpreters. And it's human, everyone will flee for their life, so we cannot be blamed. We took reasonable steps. And the Republic of Future has put in place deliberate strategies to ensure accessible communication for persons with disabilities. We mandate that stations provide sign language by regulations, and if private entities fail to follow this, this should not be our fault. There have been Braille publications and 5-minute videos with sign language interpretations that were issued to secondary schools during the 5-year educational program in 2013, with instructions to be broadcast every 2 years. So we are really trying our best. You see, we are a poor state with no resources, but we are doing our best, Honorable Committee. We ask the Honorable Committee to find us not in violation, as we have taken all the practical steps. The issue of Article 5 on equality and non-discrimination, the segregation of persons with disabilities was a positive measure meant to meet their needs. The issue of institutionalization of persons with disabilities, institutions were constructed a long time ago by religious leaders to provide protection to persons with disabilities. Upon the ratification of the CRPD, the Republic of Future, in respect to Article 19 of the CRPD on independent living and inclusion in the community, the government is promoting community living, and many people without disabilities have resorted to reside in the same institutions. Government has constructed cinemas that are watched by all people in the community. However, persons with disabilities have the right to choose where to live, but in the absence of support services due to limited resources, and the lack of family support, government has found it paramount to accommodate persons with disabilities in the institutions in order to continue providing support services. This is a temporary situation, and after the reconstruction process, the situation will change. The present facts indicate that there was no transport dispatched to evacuate persons with disabilities living in institutions. As the state of future, we believe that persons with disabilities are part of the citizens, and we repurpose public buses to evacuate them. We humbly pray that the honorable committees find the state not in violation of the right to independent living. Regarding the issue of the death of persons with disabilities that were killed by the storm, the state of future gave several warnings to the citizens before the storm happened, which was part of protecting life guaranteed under Article 10 of the CRPD. For sure, the state of the future has never interfered with the lives of persons with disabilities. However, the storm was a natural disaster, an accident that came unexpectedly, and an act of God. Those persons who remained in rural areas after warnings had been instituted foresaw the risk and stayed there. So in tort or negligence, we say that was not volenti non fit injuria, because they warn you and then you stay there. So that is a defense, and the Republic of Future has not been in violation, because we have not been negligent towards the protection of life of persons with disabilities. But due to poor roads and the limited resources, evacuating persons with disabilities in the rural areas would be a burden to the balance of proportionality to the state of future. The state also applied the principle of necessity by evacuating those in urban areas, since many people with disabilities settle there. The right to life under Article 10 of the CRPD connotes a negative obligation upon the state to refrain from taking lives of persons with disabilities. The state of future retains a margin of appreciation to interpret the right to life to allow for flexibility in the determination of the state's intervention. Article effect is that to the effect that everyone has a right to life. But this one sentence mentioned in Article 10 does not detail obligations of the state to guarantee protection to this right. Article 10.2 lacks a general comment to interpret the obligations stipulated under Article 10. Although the state has a negative obligation not to take life, but rather protect it, the public emergency that occurred took lives was a complex situation, and it was beyond our capacity as the Republic of Future.
Agent, I have a question.
Yeah.
You've covered very in significant ways what you did around institutionalization. What was done for the people with disabilities that were incarcerated in jails and prisons during this natural disaster?
What was done? I beg your pardon, Honorable Commissioner.
What responsibility did the state take for disabled people that were not in your traditional disability institution, but disabled people that were incarcerated in jails and prisons?
The facts of people in prisons are not particularly stated here, and I have not addressed my mind to it, Honorable Commissioner. Thank you.
One other question I have is, obviously you have done a phenomenal job of including disabled people throughout your government, as you said. Did your disabled political appointees within your government have access to materials and information about the impending disaster in alternative formats to meet their disability access needs? And if so, why were they given access, but the general public, your citizens, were not given equitable access?
Much obliged, Honorable Commissioner. Well, as I have rightly said, our information portfolio was destroyed, but we have tried to provide sign language interpretation in videos, in educating people about emergency plans, and we have provided Braille. We have not been able to provide information in alternative formats such as easy to read, but this is a process that is progressive. We are trying to do all our best to realize the right of access to information, but it's subject to progressive realization due to limited resources. Thank you.
One follow-up. Was your Minister of Social Affairs evacuated safely and appropriately?
Apparently, our Minister of Social Affairs has their own means. For example, I'll give you an example, Honorable Commissioner. If the storm happened now, where you are seated, I think not even the honorable judges will rescue you. Just try to learn for your life. So that's what he did. Can I proceed, Honorable Commissioner?
My fellow Honorable Commissioner has additional questions.
Yes, Honorable Commissioner.
Ajahn, I have a question for you. We got the data that there is 300 adults with disability living in the institutions, and there is issue on evacuations. And your government also have what it called national emergency plan. So my question is, in your national emergency plan, there is action on how to ensure that person that living in the institutions will be evacuated safely, or is that any progress where your emergency action plan also include the institutionalization in the action plans? And my second question is...
Honorable Commissioner, can I answer one first, please?
Okay.
So, in our emergency plan, there are prescriptions under Section 60 that, of course, wheelchairs and lighting and electric energy will be provided to persons with disabilities in institutions. But even if this doesn't exist, we did all that was possible. We brought helicopters to evacuate people, and we tried to take them up so that they wouldn't be affected by the storm. So regardless of what exists in the emergency plan, we had a strategic intervention and we did all we could. But like I said, we retain a margin of appreciation, a balance of proportionality, and we just have to cooperate. We are just an under-resourced state.
My second question is that you mentioned a lot that your country will do anything you can to ensure inclusive emergency response, and it's take time because your country is under resources. Can you mention if there is a timeline that your country consider when will be those accessibility or reasonable accommodation can be provided in the emergency settings, and if you also have any program in your national emergency plan on inclusive disaster preparedness?
All right. So the five-year strategic plan is supposed to be reviewed after every 5 years to highlight the challenges, and learning from the storm will make everything possible to ensure that the plan is more inclusive than it was. By the fact that disability and the UNCRPD is reflected in our first Section 3 of the National Development Plan is a good sign that we have the political will to provide for protection of persons with disabilities during emergencies. Thank you. Should I proceed? So we have taken the necessary step by to protect life by putting in place several warnings to ensure that people in the urban areas were evacuated. So, inaccessible warning systems, given the limited resources available, the set did what was reasonably practicable to ensure that the existing emergency warnings were available. These warning systems were inclusive in as far as disability was represented in the pre-planning process by the minister. However, in the event of an emergency, challenges are bound to happen. Indigenous rights. In the days following the hurricane, landslides occurred due to flooding of mountains, which made roads to some rural areas, mostly serving the indigenous communities, impassable. However, the CRPD does not have an outright article providing for indigenous rights. The CRPD committee that has not addressed the subjects in the interpretation. The state of future is therefore not in violation of the rights of indigenous minorities. We respect the rights of indigenous people, but find it inappropriate for this to be raised under this convention. We take an intersectional approach to women with disabilities, children and young people, but we are not in violation of their rights. Discrimination of women with disabilities. The state of future is not in violation of Article 6 on non-discrimination of women with disabilities. As a measures put in place to evacuate the citizens of the Republic of Future were inclusive of men and women. Articles 7 and 23 of the rights of children as well as family. The state of future finds itself not in violation of the above rights as the emergency was too complex and beyond our expectations. We pray to the Honorable Committee to find the state of future not in violation. We will work towards developing more strategies that are inclusive. Thank you very much.
Hi, so we are HEAT, the climate change organization, and today we're just going to put up a few points around the climate impact of the disaster and what we believe should have been done. Also, just really want to quickly summarize from the claims of the parts of the CRPD that were violated: Article 5, Article 10, 11, 19, 29, 26, 28, 31. And so even before we start, we can see that this is significant. The state claims that prevention measures were created in place and that the conflict that took place that happened 20 years ago was one of the significant reasons why they were unable to put things together. We believe that the use of helicopters getting disabled people out was not enough. Not only the fact that it was, around disabled people, but also the environmental impact of the emissions and the fumes. We also believe that prevention measures were not considered in this emergency. The devastating consequences and the human rights violations as a consequence of that is why it was critical that there should have been a national emergency plan that involved disabled people. The consequences of not including disabled people in national emergencies like this are devastating, as we can see. We can also see that the climate impact from the increase of waste as a result of the new plan, the emissions from evacuating transport like the aeroplanes, and the indigenous community being severely impacted by this. More likely, and in the future, the impact will be more severe, and climate experiences will continue to happen in this regard. So we believe that this is a really crucial example to get right around with the CRPD committee to find out what we can do next time to prevent such a catastrophic disaster from happening again. We also believe the economic and financial impact of not having a plan was also devastating, and prevention from this happening in the first place could have reduced a lot of harm. By not responsibly preparing for the crisis they knew was coming, giving the feedback and the fact that it wasn't a plan that involved disabled people, we are concerned that the climate response was counter to climate activism. We believe the resources were incorrectly spent, and as we said, it was bad for the environment and a significant carbon footprint. We also know about the indigenous and Aboriginal communities in here, and in a way that separated and segregated them from their land and didn't center them in their emergency response. As a climate organisation, we also believe that it's important to make sure that indigenous communities are involved in all of these action plans. this case also represents an example of so many other
Agent,
countries.
I have a question, excuse me, if you don't mind. The state notes that indigenous people are not protected explicitly by the terms of the CRPD. Can you help us to understand how we should take that into account, given that they're not explicitly referenced in any of the operative provisions of the CRPD?
So when we're talking about Indigenous people, we should be talking about Indigenous people with disabilities, of which there is a significant number. I should have explained that earlier. But basically, when we're talking about the Indigenous community in relation to the CRPD, we're talking about those with disabilities, which, as I said, is a significant number of people. So by not centering them in a conversation, not only were they reducing the inclusion of Indigenous people, but also Indigenous people who are disabled. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague for the next part.
And there is a growing repository of climate justice litigation data, and we would like to note that the 2015 Paris Agreement acknowledges the intrinsic link between the human rights and climate change, and hence with the disability rights as well. And the starting point for the discussion on human rights trends and disability rights and considerations in climate justice litigation should be a case of Urgenda Foundation versus State of the Netherlands. In this case, the Dutch Supreme Court held the protection of rights under the European Convention on Human Rights that required states to take preventive steps against the impact of climate change. And then this Urgenda case was closely followed globally and has influenced several similar lawsuits in other countries. In the light of this, the Supreme Court of Colombia has also found that the government's inaction against changing climate is the breach of several constitutional rights. So we can see that climate justice is intrinsically related to disability rights because it is related to human rights. And in this emergency, there had to be a disability inclusive disaster action plan, and moreover, the deinstitutionalization should have been included into the disaster action plan on the national level. Because we believe as a climate organization that, people were injured, died, or became climate refugees because of the absence or ineffectiveness of ineffectiveness of the disaster action plan. And as a climate organization, we believe that safeguarding climate justice for the poor and people with disabilities who are likely to be mostly impacted by natural disasters is aiding the fight against the overarching challenges of both poverty and inclusion challenges. Thank you.
Should I start? Okay. I am Yoshiko Miya from Amicus, the National Human Rights Institution. Amicus is the Human Rights Commission of Future under B status under the Paris Principles. Today, I will speak about the main argument and domestic situation in the Republic of Future. And Kate Njoku will explain about the situation in the neighboring country. From the perspective of the framework of international human rights law, the Republic of Future ratified the UNCRPD in 2011. According to the Article 11 of UNCRPD, the state developed the national emergency emergency plan in 2014. We can find the effort by the steps to implement UN CRPD. Although, according to a concluding observation by CRPD committee by 2014, the CRPD committee considers the state had to make more efforts to ensure the inclusion of a disability rights perspective, co-work with organizations of persons with disabilities to ensure that the requirement of persons with disabilities and to provide for a single point of contact in situations of emergency. The state has obligations to implement all articles of the UN CRPD, especially in disaster and emergency, Article 5 for equality and non-discrimination, Article 10 for right to life, Article 11 for disaster response, and Article 19, living independently and being included in the community, Article 21, freedom of expression and opinion and access to information, and Article 23, respect for home and family are to be respected. Also, before and after the storm, the state violated Article 5, 10, 11, 19, 21, and 23 in the UN CRPD. Before the storm, many people with disabilities have been institutionalized. The National Emergency Plan had been taught in secondary education, though adults, indigenous people, adults with disability were excluded. In the emergency, information accessibility for indigenous people, people with intellectual disability, deaf people were not guaranteed. Also, buses were not accessible for people with motion disability. After the storm left, 300 people in the disaster institution didn't receive enough information, explanation about the situation, medication, and other needed resources. As a result, many of them died. In the temporary housing, people with disabilities were segregated from other people. Also, they couldn't live with their family, and their protest was not heard. Also, there are the natural consequences of lack of inclusion and co-work with organizations of persons with disabilities about the National Emergency Plan. Following me, Kate will speak about the situations in the neighboring countries. Thank you. Kate?
Thank you very much. The situation in the neighboring country far away are two major violations were highlighted. That is, the neighboring state of Faraway agreed to temporarily accommodate climate refugees with support from the UN Refugee Agency. During visits to the refugee centers, humanitarian aid workers found out there were limited wash facilities, and only one of which was accessible to wheelchair users. Several disabled people reported not being granted permission to board the transport vehicles too far away. Border control staff instructed them that they would not be able to evacuate safely due to their disability. In relation to the refugee camps, in the annual report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the High Commissioner underlined that UNCRPD committee urged the contracting parties to closely monitor refugee camps and bring them in compliance with UNCRPD standards. UNCHR report states that water and sanitation facilities in emergency and temporary shelters should be accessible to those with disabilities. Priority should be given to transitional shelter, which should be close to a water supply and sanitary facilities. It is important, therefore, that shelter managers consult with persons with disabilities and their families to better adapt these facilities and failing adequate solutions on how to prioritize relocation. UNCRPD committee adopted the periodic report of Kenya in 2015, and in its concluding observation remarked that the countries should adopt measures to monitor the situation of persons with disabilities in refugee camps and internally displaced persons with disabilities, and also ensure that they are entitled to access all services available, including accessible shelters, water and sanitation, education and health. In 2014, in its concluding remarks on Germany, the committee recommends that the state party establish uniform emergency control centers across the state party, including modern protocols for deaf persons. It also recommends that the state party adopt a human rights-based strategy for disaster risk reduction and humanitarian relief, which should be inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. The study from UNHCR 2020 report suggests in general that persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected by limited access to drinking water, sanitation, hygiene, facilities, and services. In some low and middle income quarters, more than 25% of persons with disabilities do not have an indoor toilet in their dwelling. Incidentally, 50% of children with disabilities do not attend school, partly due to lack of accessible wash facilities at schools. The development goal 6 of SDG promotes access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for persons with disabilities. In 2019, Interagency Standing Committee designed the guidelines on inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action. Chapter 18 of the guidelines indicates that restricted right to water, sanitation, and hygiene exacerbates the impact of crisis on persons with disabilities, and it raises the risk of violence, poverty, environmental hazards, deterioration of health due to lack of access to wash, exclusion, and isolation. And in relation to being denied permission to cross the border, compliance with Article 11 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability requires observation of its other provisions. Article 513 on equality and non-discrimination is crucial in informing inclusive policies on emergency situations, including through the provision of reasonable accommodation. It is paramount to know that international human rights law stipulates that persons with disabilities cannot be denied any service solely because of their disability. Thus, refusing evacuation due to disability should be evaluated from equality and exclusion perspective, as well as a violation of persons' rights because of their disabilities. It is also evident that there is lack of disability awareness training by the border control who rejected transportation to persons with disability. In 2014, UNCRPD committee made a recommendation in terms of the periodic review of the state member, Azerbaijan, and all state parties to take measures to provide training to persons charged with the task of evacuating persons with disabilities in the event of an emergency. In 2014, the UNCRPD committee provided Mexico with the concluding observation to train all civil defense staff in addressing issues of security and protection for persons with disability in situations of risk, such as armed violence, humanitarian agencies, emergencies, and natural disasters, including a gender and age perspective. Thank you.
Okay, we have some point to talk about with regard to the what the government mentioned. First, it is clear there is a lack of disability perspective because persons with disabilities and their organizations are not included on all the efforts of the government towards the implementation of the emergency response, and even on the other reports with regard to the implementation of the CRPD. Also, there is a lack of coordination and cross-sectoral work. They keep mentioning that the responsibility of the implementation of the disability rights under the Ministry of Social Welfare, and also the lack of comprehensive accessibility plan. All the accessibility actions have been taken on ad hoc basis, and also they do not include persons with disabilities. Also, we have been advocating for establishment of formal mechanisms to ensure the participation of persons with disability, but also there is no formal mechanism. There is no national mechanism to ensure the coordination between the different departments and sectors to implement the disability rights. And also there is a slow progress. We can say that there is slow progress in implementing the disability rights in general, and there is no sufficient protection for our rights because still there is inequality and discrimination against persons with disability, no recognition for the denial of reasonable accommodation as disability-based discrimination. There is a lack of individualized support and reasonable accommodation provided during the evacuation and even after the crisis. Then also with regard to the consideration of indigenous people and the discrimination against them, I think the CRPD under Article 5 and also the general comment on Article 5 states that the persons with disability can face multiple and intersectional discrimination and under different identity, and the indigenous status is one of these identities.
Okay, thank you. I want also to add that the state should have known to excuse because 20 years they should have to develop partnerships and require resources to implement the rescue programs. And also during the crisis, the state have failed to evacuate the person with disabilities because they have evacuated them in the following day, which means that they have violated the Article 10 of right to life, and also the information that have been sent out was not in accessible format because it was in the national dialect and there was no sign language interpretation. Yeah, I think that's enough.
I would say with regard to the excuse of the 20 years and resources, some rights, for example, the prohibition of discrimination and the denial of reasonable accommodation, these rights should be implemented immediately. And there is no excuse for the government to delay the implementation of these rights.
Honorable Commissioners, I would like to rebut the above assertions by the complainant, Amicus Curiae and the Human Rights Commission. We as a state of future understand our own situation and context. which is not the same with the European countries that have been mentioned, Germany, Netherlands, and among others. We have experienced the war. We have experienced the disaster. If it came today, I don't think you would have the opportunity to provide reasonable accommodation to persons with disabilities. All of you would run for your lives. So we understand our own context. We have taken the appropriate steps. I'm not going to labor to explain because I did. Practicable, reasonable, and appropriate steps to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Other states have put reservations on different articles that they wouldn't want to implement. If you want to find us in violation, we have the ability and power to do that because we are a state. We are a state party that has agreed to implement the convention. Give us the opportunity to progressively implement it. You need to understand our own context. Many of you don't understand what a disaster is. You have the money. The concluding observations don't give us funding. Yes, the reports from the Human Rights Commission don't provide us the budget. So we go through what we go through because we have to protect all the citizens. We would like to find the Honorable Committee to find reasonable steps to help us maybe increase our capacities, to cooperate with us through international cooperation, because by the virtue of our being here, we are a state party and we are part of the committee to support the inclusion of persons with disabilities. The amicus curiae said that the border, is it the border of Faraway, did not allow persons with disabilities? This is an extraterritorial jurisdiction. We are not the state of Faraway, and we are not answerable to that. They retain the power of sovereignty by virtue of customary international law. Honorable members, listen to us. We are an underdeveloped country. We don't have the facilities. We need help, but we are not in violation. We have tried what we can to protect persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Honorable Commissioners, as a developing country, I need to mention, our organization needs to mention also that developing countries with civil law systems have also recognized climate change as a facet of constitutional guaranteed rights, and we need to remember the biggest climate justice litigation victory as of date, which is the Urgenda case. And in this light, there has to be adaptation measures in place and several, so that we can reduce the vulnerability to consequences of climate change and secure human rights. So the more secure facility locations and infrastructures, landscape restoration, flexible and diverse cultivation to be prepared for natural catastrophes. Research and development on possible catastrophes should be done, especially in places that are dependent on weather, and preventative and precautionary measures such as evacuation plans, inclusive evacuation plans, should be in place. Failure to do that is both a violation of climate justice rights and rights of people, of all people, regardless of their disability. Thank you.
Honorable Commissioner, I just want to add there and conclude that following from the provisions in Articles 5, 4, 11, 19, 24, 23, it is evident that the rights of persons with disabilities were violated, and also in response to other human rights treaties, submissions, documents, and recommendations. Persons with disabilities were subjected to discrimination and unequal treatment by neighboring country far away who opted to help in emergency situation. We want to state that the evacuation process was encumbered with discriminatory and exclusionary practices that violated the rights of persons with disabilities. And it is recommended that adequate measures are put in place by state parties to make sure that rights of persons with disabilities are protected in emergency situations and adequate provisions made for emergency evacuation. It is also recommended that humanitarian staffs are trained on evacuation process as well as awareness. Thank you.
the state should have to respect all human rights and also consider that persons with disabilities are among vulnerable groups, and in all programs that the state should have to include persons with disabilities.
Honorable Commissioner, this is a very unfortunate situation that's happened. We sat here, we listened to our learned friends on the other side had to say, and it's clear that they are completely unaware of the situation. But we agree it's an unfortunate situation, but we did everything in our power to make sure that our citizens were taken care of. 35% of our population are persons with disabilities. That's our family, our friends, our neighbors. There is no way that anyone can think that we intentionally disregarded the rights of these persons. Of course, if they are affected, we are too. And of course, we are completely saddened by this situation. But we did everything that we possibly could have done in the light of the situation. We put the emergency plan in place. We ensured that there was adequate help. We tried our best. So, Honorable Commissioners, we ask that now you find us not in violation of these rights. The state now rests our case.
Okay, thank you very much to our four teams for some really strenuous arguments and some tough questions from our judges. So well done again to everybody. A round of applause for all our teams for doing a great job. Okay, so while the judges retire to deliberate, the rest of us can enjoy a coffee break. Well-deserved coffee break, certainly for the teams. And we will be back here in 15 minutes, I think. Thank you, everyone. Extensive deliberations. We have a decision from the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I'll hand over to the committee to give their decision, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
The committee would like to thank everyone who came before us to help us in this challenging case. I will begin with our initial conclusions. First of all, the committee finds that there was a failure on the part of the state to include people with disabilities in the design of the national plan. And this is a vital and core obligation set out in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that was highly problematic, and this is not a requirement that's subject to progressive realization. We also found that the state should have been taking immediate and concrete steps to towards the fulfillment of the rights set out in the Convention, including Article 11 on the protection of persons with disabilities in the context of natural disaster, and it cannot invoke resource limitations and do little or nothing to move towards full implementation. Rather, it needs to take immediate, concrete steps towards the full realization of those rights. And it was entirely foreseeable that a natural disaster would likely have a disproportionate impact on the considerable population of persons with disabilities, especially those individuals living in institutions, in the light of the fact that they had coexisting disabilities and intensive support needs. I will now hand it over to my committee colleague for further conclusions.
Thank you. And after consider of all the facts that have been provided by the Disabled People Organization, National Human Rights Institution, and International Climate Activist Group, we found that the state have been violence again, the right of person with disability in some of the article of the CRPD. For example, Article 9 of the CRPD, because we know that there is no accessibility infrastructure and structure that help person with disability in emergency settings. We found that there is no awareness raising about the right of person with disability in humanitarian actor and in the government's programs and policy. It's again Article 8 of the CRPD. And there is also concern that there is lack of accessible information and access to information for person with disability during emergency setting, and it's again Article 21st of the CRPDs. And we also heard that there is already some cases that have a person with disability, particularly women with disability and children with disability, have lack access of water and sanitations. This also against Article 28 of the CRPDs. And there is also an issue to access health services, which is again Article 25. And we learned that there is no clear time framework from the state how that they can ensure that all persons with disability will be included in the national emergency plan, and that the representative is being included in the decision making on emergency setting. And we would like to say that we give 3 years for the country to improve their national emergency action plan to align with CRPD. Now I handle to my other colleagues from the CRPD committee.
There are 5 elements of an apology. Expressing regret, accepting responsibility, making restitution, genuinely promising change in a realistic timeline, and requesting forgiveness. I don't believe we heard any of that today. Climate change is real. Science is real. The policy in place was bad, if not non-existent. And the people writing it feel bad. So as we move forward, I think more than anything, we really need to ensure that we see timelines and concrete steps given. We are in June. June is the kickoff of hurricane season every year. And so moving forward, I don't think we should not see what happened in this nation happen again next June or the following June. We should not be okay with it. And I think there is time for apology, and there is time to recognize that real violations were done and people died. And our thoughts and prayers are with that nation's government.
Okay. Well, we were all, we really enjoyed listening to all of the arguments. Really, you all did a great job, and there was great camaraderie among you. That was fantastic to see among the teams, and we really hope you had fun with this, and I think you did. So we're just so grateful to the participants, and thank you so much for the hard work that you did. So we're going to now announce the awards. So the best team goes to the team whose arguments won the day, and that would be the complainants. And so congratulations to the complainants. And our best advocate for the competition is the representative from the state, Florence. And then the final award that we have is for the best argument, and that goes to Kate.
I'm here.
I'd like to organise some photographs with those winners now. So if all the members of Future Rights Now who are present, that team, want to come down to the front, we'll take a picture with the judges. So we'll start with Future Rights Now, and then we'll have Florence. Kate, since you're online, we will we will be sending you the certificate. So I hope that's okay. So Future Rights Now, please make your way to the front of the auditorium.
United Nations Committee.
Okay, so we'll bring Florence down to the front now, and we'll send this team away. Okay, can we have... Can we have one final very raucous auditorium round of applause for Kate, who also won Best Argument, who's online. Kate?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So with that, I release our judges and thank you very much for your service. And we're going to... Okay, so now we're going to... We have some other winning results, I think, to announce, Anya, right, from the poster competition. So I'll hand over to Anya to do that.
That's great. So Tuesday evening seems so long ago to me anyways right now, but we did have a great time. We had a good few posters that were submitted, and we had an academic and a non-academic category, and I think it was a really enjoyable session. It was a nice way to relax as we kind of eased our way into digesting Article 11 and all the things that we were hearing in summer school. And we always love giving researchers and delegates an opportunity to show off work that they're doing, maybe not even necessarily related to our topic. So some of the posters were definitely a very welcome break. And the standard of the posters was very high. Our two judges were Rama and Nadia, and unfortunately neither of them are here, but they were really, really impressed with the standard of the posters. We know it was a bit informal and people got a chance to mingle around, so we hope that it was a good opportunity for the researchers themselves to highlight their work and to make connections with maybe other NGOs and academic institutions. So, comments that we had from the judges was that it was a very enjoyable session. That people who were there to talk through their posters did a really good job. It can be very intimidating. They wanted to recognise that. It can be hard when somebody's asking you and expecting you to perform on the spot, but everybody rose to the challenge without any difficulties. So for the non-academic category, comments that the judges made was that in their consideration, they were basing their decision on kind of research areas and projects that were going to have the biggest impact for disabled people, and the individuals' personal experiences and how they engaged or how they demonstrated that they engaged with the topic. So the winner for the non-academic category showed that they really wanted to take all of their learning back from this week at summer school back to their own projects and their own communities. They said that the poster was simple and clear, and arguments that were made were very well articulated, and the topic related to inclusive education, which we saw come up very frequently as well through the week. So the winner for this is Mohammed S. Kamara. For our second category then, we had the academic category, and again, serious kudos from the judges about this. They said that this poster showed how to fill the gap in the area of supported decision making, that the presenter demonstrated innovative concepts to adapting even during data collection and engagement during COVID and all the limits that placed on the project, and that they really demonstrated the impact of assisted and supported decision making on young people and how it relates to independent living in the community. We might have a problem taking this photo because our winner is Cliona De Wallace, one of our own PhD students, so we're delighted. So the next thing that we need to kind of close out before we make full closing comments relates to our craftivism activity, which so many people have worked really hard on, both in person and online, and we thank you very much for embracing your inner artist. And it's really evident from the final product that you have really digested and mulled over how to express your thoughts and your opinions about the challenges and the possibilities of Article 19 and everything that we've learned during this week. So you can see our digitised photo up here. We've had a couple of contributions from our online participants as well, so they've been digitally added through some sort of magic, which I will not even try to understand. But big thanks to our colleague Jenny Dagg and Joanna Ford for helping to compile all of the craft works, for being available in the room down in GO6 to help out and to give advice, and for compiling everything together. So we have the digital photo here beside us, but the real one is out live and in person, kind of canopy is out where we had our breakfast. If you want to go out and have a look at that, it's really impressive seeing it in real life. So yeah, and we'll take photos, pose with it, use it for Instagram, whatever you want, hashtag 13IDSS. Like, this is your last chance to really to prove you were here and to make it look stylish, okay? And I think, yeah, that's posters and that's craftivism. So yeah, just a big thank you for everybody who got involved with that, and apologies if you're still finding glitter in places you don't want glitter. It was up to you. We tried to provide as many materials to be as creative as possible. So the last comments that we can have to make, and we're quite sad that it is coming to a close, but it's been an absolutely brilliant week. It's been an absolute pleasure to co-direct along with Professor Eleanor Flynn, and particularly on such an important topic, which is so relevant for the times that we find ourselves in now. Whether you were brand new to Article 11 and the UNCRPD before Monday, or if it was sort of your bread and butter of your daily life or your work before Monday, I hope that now that we've come through the whole week together, that you're able to take away new perspectives and ideas and networks and connections that will live on long after this week in Galway. On Monday, we had the opportunity to learn about the international human rights law approaches and structures that are engaged in situations of crisis for disabled people. While on Tuesday, we got to hear from perspectives of disabled children, Indigenous peoples and LGBTQI disabled people, as well as the importance of really embedding disability rights approaches into climate policies. And we heard interestingly about the stockpiling of accessible resources as a possible solution or an option for preparedness, and that this includes assistive technology in the run-up or definitely ahead of crises occurring. On Wednesday then, we got to focus on experiences during crisis, which was a really powerful day. We learned how we can and should learn from past crises across the world, and that a lot of the solutions that were developed 30, 20, even 10 years ago, that they've been really crucial in contemporary challenges that we find ourselves in over the last couple of years. And yesterday then, our final panel day, we had the opportunity to be a little bit more optimistic and more positive as we discussed pivoting after crises. And we heard from our panelists about utilising existing local government structures and the importance of those sort of mechanisms, as well as maybe bigger, broader, more national human rights structures to ensure that disabled people will not be so adversely affected in the future, and the importance of staff within especially government structures having knowledge and that there's disabled people in there informing it was super important. The role of data is really important in terms of informing the design and the delivery of Article 11 adherent policies, and also in our last panel yesterday about the role of funders and making sure that dollars and euros and all currencies that if they're being given out, that there's disability rights, thoughts and requirements being put into them, and capitalising on any and all opportunities where there are political, social or cultural shifts, and the role of social media in supporting that. So across the week, I think I have actually strained my neck with vigorous nodding. Because on Monday I was like smiling, and I realized nobody can see me smiling. So the eyebrows were working. I'm sure everybody had the same sort of, I want to show my support to the people up on the front table. So lots of vigorous nodding in agreement with basically everybody's points, everything that everybody said, but especially around the importance of kind of taking cross-disability approaches and intersectional approaches in all of our work, as we know that marginalised communities can benefit from similar approaches, whether they identify as having a disability kind of label or not. And this can be to practical interventions, or it can be like to legal advocacy and activism. I do really want to iterate yesterday that we heard about the need to have safe spaces to discuss differences, to establish those connections. Maybe we need to go outside of our comfort zone and hope people will meet us there and us meeting them there. And also to look after ourselves, navigating challenging scenarios, even if, like Rebecca said, it's just have you had lunch. If it's just food, then that's okay. Yeah. So as well as our panel sessions, then we know that there's so much knowledge flowing over cups of tea, cups of coffee, lunch, chats. I saw people knitting and sewing, lots of small groups of people that I was nearly afraid to approach because it looked like very serious, intense engagements were going on, and I had to drag panelists and speakers away at different points. But it was great to see it, great to hear so many different perspectives, bringing it back to, well, in my country or from my experience, this, and just seeing heads at work, and it's what one of the big benefits of an partially in-person summer school has been, and we hope that people online have been able to have similar experiences through the Discord channels. And please don't let it stop here. If you have had a chance to exchange details, take advantage of the technologies and keep in touch and keep it going. I think it's very evident from our moot session this morning that everyone has wrestled really well with a very complex scenario, and well done to our judges for wading through it as well. Everyone's applied all the knowledge and experiences from during the week. Thanks to everyone for questions, comments and discussions over the week. You've really contributed to making summer school such a positive and welcoming atmosphere. And I've had a few people asking kind of the representation of countries. So for our in-person attendees, we've had 35 countries represented, and then with over 100 participants online, we're sure that number is much bigger. But I think considering the times that we're in, to have such diverse representation, and I know that this summer school, we've had people from countries that have never been to summer school before. So while it was a bit of a rush to make sure that flags were represented on the table, it was a happy challenge for us to do, because the more countries that we can engage in, the better. So now for thank yous. I might grab a bottle of water. So first of all, just to thank all of the speakers who have travelled far and wide and have had to navigate airports and all the fun that entails these days. So everyone for coming to join us in person, and for those of us online, for people committing to not very sensible time frames across different time zones. So we appreciate early mornings and late nights across our speakers and delegates. We know we had some last minute changes of panels and to the programme. And while we are sorry not to have been able to include our original speakers, we're very grateful to Brian Zaw and Helena Carullo for lending us their time and expertise at very last minute notice. And I think your contributions really added to the panels. And many of our panelists doubled and triple jobbed across the course of the week as panelists, chairs, poster session judges, and today's moot court judges. So huge thank you to Rama Mustafa, to Nadia Haddad, to Janet Lord, to Rebecca Cookley and Dwi Ariani. I want to say a big thank you to the NUIG President Kieran O'Hogarty for his welcome at the start of the week and chairing our opening session, and shortly to our Head of School of Law, Martin Hogg, for joining us today for our certificate session. Our funders, we know that summer school is a big operation, and we're very grateful to the funding support that summer school receives from Irish Aid and Fáilte Ireland. And I've heard so many comments over the week about the scale of summer school, and there's been real recognition of the work of the team. So we'd like to thank our audiovisual and online support team, who have been brilliant: Cormac Staunton, Blue Hanley Online, and Brendan Dowd, who have been between here and online and running all around the place. So thank you very much for making sure we've been heard, and I hope you've been making us look good all week, because we need all the help we can get. So thank you very much to them. And also then, in terms of the teams that have been supporting us to make the summer school as accessible as possible, so we have our captioners and our sign language interpreters who've been working very hard this week, and with particular challenges around our hybrid approach, but I think we managed okay. So a delegate told me yesterday, and I was delighted to hear it, that they feel like this week has been an all-inclusive resort because the catering has been of such a good quality. So that's very high praise for Sale Cafe staff here at ILIS for keeping us well fueled during all of our sessions and activities. So thank you very much to them. And now to the CDLP team. Huge thanks. It is an absolute team effort, a Trojan team effort, and it is many months in the making, particularly Joanna Forward and Sharon Hegarty, who are the true bosses of summer school. There hasn't been a query or a request that they haven't been happy to facilitate and to do it like just nearly instantaneously from the top of their head. So Jo and Sharon, huge. We're really grateful to all of our volunteers who have clocked up steps running across the building in the last while, and they've been doing scene and unseen tasks, supporting delegates, supporting the moot court, facilitating moot courts, and craftivism. And again, big thanks to Jenny and the craftivism. And we've got our volunteers Gina Schmidt, Eduardo Marchant, Kerr Gibson, Safia El Siddig, Niamh Malloy, and Fiona Morrissey, who have either online or in person been doing serious amounts of work. And we've kind of drawn them from our pool of interns and our current and past LLM students, so it's great to have engagement from them. So finally then to everyone on the CDLP staff team, as well as Jo and Sharon, and they've been drafted from our PhD students, postdoctoral researchers like myself, and our academic staff. So they're Ainsley McLean, Queena DeWallish, Colin Coffey, Ailish Nikiv, our lovely co-director Eleanor Flynn, Janos Fiala-Batora, Jenny Dagg, Keelan Barry, Maria Flaherty, Mary Flaherty, and Suzanne Doyle-Gillud. So just, yeah, huge thanks. There's been so much work on over the week. So that's only to say, after the certificates, we wish everybody a very safe onward journey, and to kind of draw and steal for messages over the week, please go back to your institutions, your organisations, your research projects, your government structures, now that you are armed with so many good examples of positive solutions, and please disrupt norms for a more inclusive humanitarian landscape.